So we were told that Pete Hegseth would come before the cameras, but he did it very briefly. He obviously didn't take any questions, although we'll see if he has anything else to say as those cameras follow him down the hallway. But the bottom line is this: he is not giving any indication that he is willing to step back. He called it a wonderful process to go through, which is an interesting way to put it, at least given everything that's been surrounding him and the controversies. And he basically said what he said today, Vaughn, in a statement that he put out about a war-fighting ethos that he was going to continue to fight. We're going to have to wait and see what he says in the sit-down with Megyn Kelly. But I wonder what your takeaway is from his time on the Hill. I should say on Tuesday, he met with Senator Eric Schmitt. On Monday, Tommy Tuberville, Cindy Loomis, we mentioned her, Cruz, Lee, Senator Rick Scott, all of those expressed support for his nomination, though it's not clear exactly how many of these new allegations have come out or details have come out since they met with him. And he is to meet with incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune. He has met with him, Roger Wicker, and Senator Joni Ernst. That's the backdrop, what he was talking about, the process of advise and consent. But what do you take away from his day on the Hill today and what you just heard from him?
Right. At this point in time, he's been reticent to answer specific questions, at least publicly, from reporters. I think that was our colleague Garrett Haake. As Hegseth was walking away from the cameras, I began to ask him, do you think you have the character, before Hegseth disappeared down the hallway. And I think that is where this Megyn Kelly interview is going to be notable, the extent to which she asks or does not ask pointed questions of him, and whether he provides responses that alleviate any concerns, particularly for several Republican senators who have publicly called for FBI background checks of Hegseth and others. I think it's most notable that here from Palm Beach, though, the fact that the Trump transition team is already talking about individuals who are under consideration to replace Pete Hegseth as the DOD nominee. When you're looking at those individuals who sources tell Courtney Kube, our colleague Matt Dixon, and myself, include the likes of Joni Ernst, the Republican senator from Iowa, who is somebody here who was just at Mar-a-Lago last week. She was here in Palm Beach on election night for Donald Trump's election victory, has a long history with Donald Trump, but has not always necessarily been rah-rah MAGA. She has pushed him back during the first Trump administration, particularly on tariff policy, and somebody who even 2 years ago, when Donald Trump skipped her annual Republican affair in Iowa, in which every other presidential candidate on the Republican side came and he did not. She publicly spoke out to a certain extent against Donald Trump deciding not to come to that. But then you also look at Bill Hagerty, another Republican senator who his name has been floated for multiple other jobs but has repeatedly been passed up. And the other notable name is Michael Waltz, who has already been tapped to be his national security advisor, but we're told could be shifted into the position to be the DOD nominee. And each of those individuals would be expected up on Capitol Hill to have a much easier path toward confirmation than what Pete Hegseth is currently enduring. I think this comes at a time for Donald Trump in which there are serious questions about his judgment and the decision to bypass the typical FBI background check process, and the belief that whoever he puts forward for nomination would be able to pass through the Republican majority Senate. Clearly, with Matt Gaetz going down, the decision has been made quite clear from Republican senators that they're not going to be a rubber stamp for whoever he puts forward, simply because Donald Trump won, including with the popular vote.
So we just got some new sound from a Democratic Senator Blumenthal, who was spoken to by Garrett Haake, who asked him about the status on the Hill. And we want to play for you what Blumenthal just told our NBC reporter.
I've talked to 5 to 10 Republicans who have said to me they're just waiting for the right moment to say no to Pete Hegseth.
Your colleagues saying that to you privately is a much lower bar than being willing to vote against him publicly or even say publicly that they won't support him. Why do you think so few Republicans, none by my count, have been willing to come out and say they will definitively not support this nominee?
Nobody wants to defy Donald Trump.
Which brings me, Vaughn, to Donald Trump himself. And I was thinking, as Courtney was describing the great reporting that our team did about his fellow Fox News employees and former employees, Donald Trump is known to be a teetotaler. He has spoken very openly about the destruction of addiction He did it. In fact, I was remembering when he was talking to a group of folks talking about fentanyl crisis, but he specifically mentioned his brother, who was an alcoholic and who he believes that was a contributing factor to the heart attack that ultimately took his life. What do we know really about Donald Trump and how he's feeling about Hegseth? And are these kinds of allegations new to him? Could they be influencing him?
Pete Hegseth's selection came very quickly. There were other individuals who were under consideration to lead the Pentagon, and Pete Hegseth, after a meeting with Donald Trump, surprised many people inside of in the transition who had watched Donald Trump interview others who were in the position to be that potential Pentagon nominee. But with Pete Hegseth, you note the drinking. We have seen Donald Trump over the last 9 years repeatedly come to the defense of individuals accused of sexual assault or sexual misconduct. And, of course, Donald Trump has defended himself against such accusations and was found liable for sexual abuse himself. But that is where the concern about repeated intoxication could meet a different threshold of concern for Donald Trump. And that is where the reporting around not only his time at the Veterans Organization, but also Courtney's reporting at his time at Fox could very well be of paramount concern. And I think that is where you see Donald Trump even looking to consider the likes of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who he had sought to extinguish the political career of over the course of the last 2 years, is notable. And I think this also comes down to the fact that Donald Trump's close nucleus of individuals who he has the utmost faith and trust in to be loyal to him is actually quite limited in terms of being, number one, loyal, and number two, qualified. And I think that is what led to some of these perhaps surprising picks, because Donald Trump said from the outset that he wanted to surround himself in a cabinet by individuals who he had no questions about their loyalty to him and his policies and the willingness to execute his wishes over these 4 years. And I think that this is where it's all coming to a head, because that group of individuals who Donald Trump, number one, trusts, but also meet the qualifications that individuals up on Capitol Hill, including Republican senators, would expect to traditionally fill those key cabinet positions. I think that is where Donald Trump is now running into some trouble, because that list of names is dramatically shrinking in real time.
Which seems, David, to put these two men, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, on two different paths, because, wow, full court press by Hegseth. We just saw him come before the cameras. We heard him say that he has done a long interview, a sit-down interview with Megyn Kelly. His mother was on television today basically saying he's not the same person he was, and seemingly recanting some of what she wrote to him in an email during his second divorce and his own op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. On the other hand, you have that new reporting, and you touched on it, that Donald Trump is considering making Ron DeSantis the new nominee, a man with whom he's had a contentious relationship over the years. Let's listen.
Ron DeSanctimonious has the poll numbers of a wounded bird falling from the sky.
Somebody like Ron DeSantis cannot do it because he's owned and controlled by the globalist establishment who always puts America last.
They keep saying, oh, I think DeSantis can do okay with farmers. I don't think so. Based on polls, he's not doing okay with anything.
The problem with Ron DeSanctimonious is that he needs a personality transplant, and those are not yet available.
And yet now they're having these conversations. They're talking to each other. Tell me where you think this is headed, and if you think that this full court press that we are seeing from Pete Hegseth to save his nomination has a chance of succeeding.
I don't think it has a chance of succeeding, because what's missing from the story is Donald Trump's not making phone calls to senators on behalf of Hegseth. J.D. Vance is not up on the Hill on behalf of Hegseth. And we're just talking about the sexual misconduct and the drinking. We haven't gotten to very substantive issues about the role of women in the military, which would be representative of some hard Jody Ernst questioning. With 5 weeks to go before the confirmation hearings, 4 weeks, whatever the number is, what Hegseth is doing right now seems to be they just sent him out there to buy time. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Donald Trump actually gets more reflexive and digs in. But the fact that there are leaks about other candidates, to Vaughn's point, suggests that the Donald Trump political operation is already signaling that Hegseth is done and they're moving on. That's a hard spot for Hegseth, but then the question becomes, who's next? despite all of the insults of Ron DeSantis, the bitterness is real between both of them. The truth is, Ron DeSantis holds over Donald Trump's head the Florida Senate seat once Marco Rubio presumably will be confirmed as Secretary of State. The Trump family wants that to go to Laura Trump. Ron DeSantis has other allies he could give it to. That currency is probably what's bringing the two together. For Ron DeSantis, it's a perfect opportunity. You can serve your country as Secretary of Defense, and he is a lame duck now as governor, but he would not be should he be Secretary of Defense in the first term of the Trump administration. Perhaps it does set him up to run for president again, which is ultimately Ron DeSantis' long-term goal.